Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing My Brilliant Friend Season 4 Episode 6, and this was an emotionally devastating episode. Elena's mother has passed and Nino has finally been caught in the act, however not in the way that we were anticipating, and even in the books this threw me off completely, and I think it speaks to Elena as a narrator because everything that she has assumed about Nino is totally incorrect. She is in total shock. First half of the episode focuses on Elena's mother, and I just thought this was emotionally devastating and really beautifully choreographed. The episode begins with Alfonso driving Elena to the hospital. Alfonso and Elena have a lot in common. Like Elena, Alfonso has always felt very lost, and he credits Lila to his success. Before Lila, he explains that he really had no problems keeping up appearances. However, his wife had a problem with it. After meeting Lila, he explains how she was able to pull him out of this darkness, out of this shell that he's been in his whole life. On one hand, Lila has enabled Alfonso to live a more authentic life. However, on the other hand, she's taken advantage of his vulnerabilities to carve him out in her image. If you remember in the earthquake episode, she informs us that she is using Alfonso in some way. Like, she was able to identify these insecurities in him and these vulnerabilities in him and use him as a shield to hide her own. And Alfonso looks very distressed. He looks very lost. And so does Elena, to be honest, at this point. Like Lila, Nino basically did the same thing to Elena. He was able to kind of identify these insecurities in her and carve her out to be a woman most convenient for him. When they arrive at the hospital, Marcello completely ignores Alfonso, and you could tell it's really bothering him, and he immediately greets Elena and informs her about her mother. I thought these scenes with Elena's mother saying her final goodbyes to her sons and her grandchildren was absolutely beautiful. Elena's mother orders her sons to take the job that Lila has offered, so it seems like Lila has reluctantly agreed to give her sons a second chance, and even though they are very reluctant, they accept because they want to set their mother's heart at ease. And Elena has been successful at easing a lot of her mother's worries before her death. And one of the funniest scenes is when Elena protests when her mother orders Marcello to marry her sister, and the way her mother dismissed her, like, you're with Nino. Basically, no one is interested in what Elena has to say because Marcello, for better or worse, at least he's available. At least he is not living a double life. He may be a criminal, but I feel like Nino is still worse. In some ways, I think the marriage is to make up for the fact that Marcello and his brother just lost 2 employees to Lila, their arch nemesis, and it really feels like everyone is on their best behavior even though they want to kill each other. And in a lot of ways, Elena coming back to the neighborhood was a good thing. Her daughters were able to reconnect with her mother and her side of the family because they're very attached to Pietro's parents and that side. So they were also devastated losing their grandmother. I thought this scene of the whole family waiting outside while Elena remains in the room alone, watching her mother take her last breaths, was so emotionally devastating. And no child wants to outlive their parents. And even though I know that day will come, thankfully I still have both my parents, it's not something that I will ever be ready for. Death always comes as a surprise, even if you are expecting it, even if you are preparing for it. I just felt like the way they choreographed this scene, it was too real. And the actress who plays Elena's mother is so wonderful. And I wish this show was more popular because she deserves all the Emmys in the world. It was so emotionally impactful and she showed such range. I was like, it was a tough scene to watch. Watching her mother die, Elena is reminded of how quickly life is consumed. She mentions how coming in contact with the concreteness of death, this is becoming a reality, time is passing her by. And she doesn't have as much time as she would love to believe. I thought the funeral scene was super intense. You could cut the tension with a knife. Everyone, again, is on their best behavior. This is the first time we're seeing everyone together. And you could tell they still have really hard feelings towards one another. When it comes to grief, everyone has their own way of expressing it. Elena doesn't cry, but she explains that for years, her mother's passing has never really left her. And I think there are certain deaths that you will never get over, and a mother's death is definitely one of them. I thought what Lila's dad said at the funeral was super ominous He was like, as neighborhood people, the only thing certain is death, regardless of who or what you want to become. And I felt like he was sending shots to his daughter. Like, he has always been, honestly, a terrible father. And I think what he was insinuating is that regardless of how much power and prestige you think you have, death is the great equalizer, which I thought was a super petty thing to say at a funeral, but maybe I misinterpreted what he was saying. But to me, it just came off as like mean-spirited. After the funeral, the episode makes this time jump, and we see that Elena is still very much grieving her mother, and her grief has manifested in different ways, specifically her mother's limp. And this limp is a psychological pain, and I think it's her way of maintaining this contact with her mother in some way. During this time, Leela gives birth to her daughter, and the contrast between Leela's birth and Elena's birth is night and day. I honestly thought Leela's birth was more realistic. Like, I don't have children, but I would be screaming. Like, it just looks like a painful process. And Elena tried to downplay it, like, oh, you're exaggerating. But she is not exaggerating. Like, I think it just looks incredibly painful. And Elena has always found a way to lie to herself. She was giving birth to her daughters with Pietro. She was very annoyed with Leela's description of birth, if you remember in the earlier seasons, because her descriptions have stayed the same. She basically explained, like, this is a horrible process and it never gets easier. And Elena just didn't want to hear that, because we're always told that giving birth is this natural process, but there is nothing natural about it. Like, it looks like hell. Again, I think Elena is really good at creating narratives to kind of subdue or like drown out her own sorrows and pain. Having their children together around the same time period brings them closer together, because they start focusing on their daughters, and this bond it kind of takes their friendship to a new level. She credits Leela's birth with getting her through her mother's death, and this newfound bond that she has with Leela will also get her through Nino's infidelity and hopefully final departure for good. And everything about Nino, I know I do this every video, but I really have to go in on him. I thought what the doctor said about Leela's birth was really distressing, because you can tell that these doctors already had an opinion of Leela before they went in. Like, I think the doctor described it as unnatural, like a fight between mother and child. Like, I did not like that doctor whatsoever. But it seems like, again, this hospital is Nino's hospital, and Nino seems to be involved in everyone's business but his children's. And in this episode, we find out that Nino has indeed become an absentee father. He is totally checked out. If you remember in the last episode, he was doing the bare minimum at least. It seems like when his daughter was born, he was at least showing up and bringing diapers. And after her mother's death, according to this conversation, he is just done. He has no interest in the child, and worse, he has no interest in what Elena's up to. During a dinner party, it slowly starts to dawn on Elena that maybe this man is unreliable. And this dinner party again highlights how opportunistic Nino is. Listening him to ramble on, like he's such a scammer. He describes this company that he wants to write about, Fiat, and he says the only way to change the system is from the inside. And of course he thinks that because all he's ever done in his life is jockey for position and power. Like, he has no value. I also thought it was really funny how after the dinner party he insisted on sending him the essay anyways, even though he called him boring. Like, Nino will never ever take no for an answer. Like, I would compare him to a crow that's constantly circling his prey. Like, he's just always waiting in the wings. But back to this dinner party, like, these guests were so annoyed with him. They thought he was so fake, but they didn't really know what to do about it. And so they turned their attention to Elena and asked about her writing. Now, it seems like Elena has been a successful writer. However, she's very inconsistent. And these publishers offer her an opportunity to publish a new book, but she has to get a draft in the next few months. Something that she's not really sure she's able to do because of the child and her mother's death. Like, she's kind of paralyzed. However, she agrees to it instinctively, not really knowing how she's going to meet these deadlines. And this offer really triggers an argument between Nino and Elena, and I think Nino is a bit jealous that they were more interested in her than him. Elena basically asks him, how do you suppose I write this novel that they're expecting? Because he doesn't help. He doesn't help with the child. And worse, he doesn't really ask her about her life anymore. I think Nino is the type of person that enjoys the chase. Like at the time with Pietro, the only reason that he took any interest in her work was because he recognized that Pietro wasn't interested, so he kind of positioned himself as opposite to him. But he never cared about her work to begin with. He just did it so he could steal her away from a man that made him feel very insecure about who he was. And a part of the reason Elena ran away with him is because she really believed they'd be this power couple, that they would thrive together, they would write together. Instead, the only person thriving here is Nino. During this conversation, she calls him out for running from conference to conference to conference, and his reaction was hilarious. He was basically like, what does that have to do with me? So I should stop going because you can't go? Like he has sacrificed absolutely nothing to be with her, and he has done the bare minimum. He's still with Eleonora even though she's about to divorce Pietro. And I have to defend Nino in this regard because he never promised to leave his wife. This was never a condition, and she knew what it was before she entered this relationship. And he promised to do what he can. And that's exactly what he's doing. Like the bare minimum. Mentions the fact that they hired this maid to help, which I thought was super ominous considering what we find out later. And it seems like they're no longer as intimate as they used to be because she mentions the fact that he's disgusted with her. And I don't think they're as close as they were. Like I think they've been drifting apart for some time. And she thinks it's because he's no longer attracted to her, when in fact, Nino gets bored. The reason that he's not interested in her is because he has other women. Like, this is a man that has women in rotation. At this point, Elena is exhausted, and she's kind of losing the passion for him. Like, she's trying to be angry with him, but it's almost like she doesn't care. And she comes to realize that if she wants to support her daughters and her family, she is going to have to write this book no matter what. Like, forget about the groceries, forget about these errands, someone else can do it. Like, she's gonna have to buckle down and come up with an idea as soon as possible. And one of the things she mentions in her narration is her ability never to get overwhelmed. And I will credit Elena with that. Like, she has a way of just kind of getting through very difficult situations. And her mother does mention it before she dies, how Elena finds her own way through very tough times. And this is no different. Now, before catching Nino in the act, she spends a day alone at the sea, contemplating her relationship to Nino. And she admits that this fiery passion, this obsession that she's had with him over the years, is slowly dying down. And for some reason, she's unable to separate Lila from Nino. Like, she seems to think there are two different Ninos. The Nino before he met Lila and the Nino after he was with Lila. And somehow, I think she blames Lila for corrupting Nino and making him this way, when in fact Nino is the corruption, Nino is the virus. And you can see it through his actions. Like, they say actions speak louder than words. Like, at this point, she's just happy if he talks to the child. Like, even before she leaves to brainstorm ideas, she basically asks the maid not to wake Nino up. Like, he does nothing. Even when he's there, he's not waking up, he's not helping with the baby. He crashes and he leaves. Like, he is completely useless. Now, while she's contemplating her ideas and how useless Nino is, she spots a mother and her child and remembers that she has to go and buy diapers. And that's when she goes back home and finds Nino in the act. And this scene, even in the book, blew my mind. I was like, what? Because at this point, the only perception we have of Nino is through Elena. Like, we don't really know how Nino is. Like, we just base it off what she tells us. And this scene, I feel like, broke everything because I was shocked. I knew he was cheating, but I didn't know he was that dirty. And granted, y'all know I have very low expectations of Nino, and he managed to surpass them. She just doesn't know what to do. She is capturing every moment in her mind, watching him thrust into this woman with such pleasure on his face. And I mean, it was just like the most jarring thing. It took this moment for her to finally realize that this man has always been scum. He was never not scum. And I love how she's finally able to connect Nino to his father. Like, they have always been one and the same. And all these memories that she has been repressing, specifically this assault on the beach, they come flooding out, right? Like, she's not able to maintain this image anymore, and she can't really deny what's in front of her anymore. He was always the same scummy little man. he just got very good at hiding who he was. As soon as she sees Nino cheating, she quickly grabs the baby and runs out of the apartment and grabs her daughter and goes to Lila's place. And when she picks up Dede and Elsa, they could tell that something was wrong. Dede in particular, she's like, why is the baby naked? Like, what is going on here? And some part of her, I think, knew, like, oh, not Nino. When they arrive at Lila's home, Lila is completely shocked, but she's also not that shocked because she knew this day would come, but maybe not so soon. Elena informs Lila that Nino cheated, and she describes this scene as ridiculous and compares herself to this woman, saying she's old, she's fat, she's gross. And I was like, Elena, it was never about the looks. Like, come on. I think Elena has always felt inferior to Lila because Lila has always been the beautiful one, and she's always felt inferior to other women in general. And I think as women, we're always taught that our most important asset is our looks. But in reality, like, show me a beautiful woman and I will show you a man who will get bored and tired of sleeping with her. Like, it's never been about the looks. And when it comes to cheating, there are different levels. Like, there are people who cheat once, like it's an emotional connection. And then there are people like Nino who are serial cheaters. They're serial killers. Like, they're addicts, basically. Nino is an extreme. Like, he is the worst form of cheater because he just doesn't care. Like, he'll get it anywhere, anytime. I think with Nino, he gets off on conquering other people and taking what doesn't belong to him, which is why Elena appealed to him, because she belonged to a man that was so much better than him. And watching her describe the scene, I mean, like, she caught him with a woman that she would never expect. You know, like, there was just nothing threatening about her. And no amount of makeup or ab work is gonna stop someone from cheating on you. Like, that's just not what this is about. Because if that were true, he would just stay with his wife. Eleonora is rich. From what we saw of her, she was very beautiful. And there was nothing wrong with her. And yet he is out on these streets having babies with anybody and anything. Like, that's the thing. He is having babies on her. He's an animal. And I think it's important to note that love is not a compulsion. Like, this love that she has for Nino is truly a sickness. She was in love with a boy she only knew from afar. And as a result, she filled in all these details about him, not knowing a damn thing about him. And even though she has garnered information about him that contradict this fantasy that she's written up about him, somehow she's doubled down and stuck by him. Lila finally informs Elena what she's been holding back, which is what we've already assumed, which is he has been trying to get with her. And it seems like he's been trying to get with her even before Elena. Like, he's been circling back to her to see if she'll change her mind. Lila tells her this kind of as a last-ditch attempt to save her, because it is now or never. And she is doing her best to plead with her friend, because Elena is still like, I need to talk to him. And she's like, for what? Do you still want to be with him? And this is like a critical point in Elena's life, because if she proceeds with Nino, there will be nothing left. And Lila tells her that very clearly. Like, are you willing to throw away everything you worked for this ragdoll? I thought Lila's description of him was perfect. Like, his meanness, like, everything about Nino is vanity. He doesn't care about anything. Like, he has the audacity to call Lila and ask to speak on his behalf. Like, the man has no shame. Absolutely no shame. And I think he's so sick that he really believes he can talk his way out of anything, which unfortunately seems to be the case with him. I think Lila was very smart in keeping this information to herself, because there would be no benefit. First, her friend was pregnant. Also, Elena, I'm not sure why she needed to see it to confirm it, but she always knew that he was up to no good. And I think Lila's kind of final push here was just like, okay, you're kind of almost, you're 1 foot out the door. I need you to get out. I need you to fully escape now. I think in so many ways, Elena has used Nino as a shield. And this is the first time that she's completely alone. Like, she has no one. Like, she's holding on to Nino because she says, I don't know how to live without him. And that prospect terrifies her. Because without Nino, without Pietro, she feels very vulnerable and out in the open. Like, it feels like naked for everyone to see. I thought it was very telling that the last scene was of her covering her ears because she was still trying to block out what she just saw. Like, she's still trying to hold on to something, but it's just gone. That's how the episode ends. I thought it was a fantastic episode. Finally, we will be wishing Nino adieu, farewell, get out. Like, I couldn't even believe what I was watching. And I think, again, it speaks to Elena as a narrator, because I was just as shocked as she was, which tells me that Nino is actually either much worse than we imagined, or she's much more delusional than we thought. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.